All right. So here we go, guys. Our next lesson. I'm going to go ahead and go over this with you so that you'll be able to do your classwork. Hope you guys are behaving well for Coach Jones. Don't give him any trouble, and we'll get through this. So, relations between Native Americans and European settlers is what we'll be talking about today. Try and get this thing knocked out in about 15 minutes or less, and you should have already done your warm-up. If not, go ahead and pause this video, tackle your warm-up assignment, submit it, and then come back to this video. Once you're done with the video lesson that we're doing right now, then you'll be able to go ahead and do your classwork. Both will be graded, and hopefully this will be our last week of doing this nonsense, and I can be back in person with you guys, okay? So, with all that out of the way, let's get started. Here's what your warm-up was. It was a request for you to tell me in at least 3 complete sentences, how do the distinctive ecoregions of South Carolina affect our state economically and culturally? If you did the readings in the PDF, okay, that I had posted earlier, you should be able to see that. All right, you should be able to kind of make a discernment about what exactly went on in South Carolina. What was the environment like? What did those environmental factors allow people to do for business or not allow them to do for business, right? And then culturally, how did it kind of shape our state's history? Because you got to think, the type of business people are capable of having and the ways that they're able to make money shapes the way that people behave as well, okay? So take all those things into consideration. Give me at least 3 good complete sentences, okay, at a minimum. So that's our warm-up for today. Now, the state standard. So we got the brand new 2019 state standards here. Standard 1 says to demonstrate an understanding of the development of South Carolina during the settlement and colonialization of North America in the period of 1500 to 1756. And the standard that we're working with today is 8.1 CC, which is asking us to, let me move this out of the way. There we go. It's asking us to analyze the changes and continuities of the Native Americans' experiences prior to and as a result of settlement and colonization. This indicator was developed to encourage inquiry into Native American civilizations and cultures prior to European contact and their interactions with Europeans during the period of settlement and colonization, including their efforts to preserve their cultures. All right, so we're just going to kind of touch on Native Americans a little bit here in this lesson. All right. So the first tribal group that we're going to talk about are one of the most profoundly, widely known tribal groups of the Eastern Woodlands people, okay? Pretty much all Native Americans, and yes, it's actually, believe it or not, it's not inappropriate to call a Native American an Indian. At the time of colonization, as natives were learning to speak English, because English speakers called them Indians, they would have learned to call themselves Indians in English. So don't think of it as some sort of a seriously offensive term or something like that. Even though they're not Indians from India, they are American Indians, and some prefer to be called that. Some prefer to be called Native Americans. It's okay. For the purposes of this class, Native American or Indian is perfectly fine. American Indian is perfectly fine. Okay? So, the Cherokee being one of the biggest groups of the Eastern Woodland tribal group, which is basically every tribe east of the Mississippi River. This is one of the largest. They were known as the real people. Okay, so that's what they called themselves. And they lived in the foothills of South Carolina. The foothills also being called, as we learned in our last lesson, the Piedmont. The Piedmont. All right, it's a very powerful nation. They lived in very large villages with a lot of people, and they lived in these wattle and daub houses. You can see a couple images of that on the right-hand side of the screen at the moment. And you see how there's these thatched together pieces of plant material, and then this mud compound is put on top of it, and then it seals it, right? It seals it together, and it makes it a great insulator, and then the finished product is something kind of like this. It's called wattle and daub. And the beautiful thing about it is it's keeps you warm in the wintertime. It's efficient way. It's an efficient way to build, utilizing the soil there in the region where they were in the Piedmont, the foothills of South Carolina, um, and uh, and it's probably the best way because you tend to have pretty mild winters and slightly more mild summers in that region than you do, as say, compared to the coast of South Carolina, where it's brutal humidity and stuff during summertime. So you didn't need quite as much breathability. It was actually kind of a good idea to keep the warm in during the wintertime and the summer sun and heat out during the summertime. So the wattle and daub house was an efficient way for them to live at the elevation, and with the climate they were in. Okay, Cherokee continued. The men would often fish by poisoning the water. Pretty interesting stuff. They could take tree bark, um, and render this type of a chemical substance, and literally it would like stun the fish. Okay, and then they could just scoop them up. All right, it basically kind of paralyzed the fish, allowing them to be easily captured. And women were included in tribal leadership, and then a council led the tribe of the Cherokee. Now, the council did have an executive portion appointed, and that would be a specific red leader and a specific white leader. Now, if you kind of think about this, think about like, what does it mean when you wave the white flag? That means we give up, right? Peace. If, red is kind of like angry, right? So the red leader was the leader during time of war. The white leader was the executive leader during times of peace. So each one kind of had a specific role and a specific responsibility, to the council and to the tribe. Okay. Now we're moving on to the Catawba. They were known as the river people because they lived right next to the Catawba River. And guess what? The Catawba River is still right easy for us to access. If you go up Interstate 77 towards Charlotte, you'll pass right on across the Catawba River. It's a beautiful place. They're also in the Piedmont, and they lived in structures called wigwams. Okay, wigwams. And they had a council that ruled their tribe as well. All right, in a wigwam, you can kind of see the construction of one here. They would use big, huge sheets, big sheets of hardwood tree, and so hardwoods being like gum, hickory, those type of trees, and they would cut off these large, like 4 by 4 foot sheets of it, and then use it almost like a shingle. Right, and you start at the bottom, you have a frame, start at the bottom, work your way up, right? And then you put the final pieces on at the top, and then when rainwater and stuff falls on it, of course, it runs right off the side, just like modern day shingles. It was a great insulator, and since they weren't quite as high elevation as some of the Cherokee, this was also a good summertime, wintertime compromise as far as a type of home. Oh, I also wanted to show you. You can see how their defenses were for their villages. Right, they would oftentimes be set up right next to the river, and then they would have a single point of entrance and exit of their village, and that way it made it easy to defend. And they would have these, like picket lines around it that prevented someone from just sneaking up on them and stuff like that. Okay, so the Yemassee, originally from Florida. They lived along the coastline of South Carolina, close to the mouth of the Savannah River, kind of from like the Charleston area south to Savannah. Down there, there's actually a place called Yemassee, South Carolina, in this area known as the Ace Basin. That's ACE, the Ace Basin. And it's a large watershed where multiple rivers come together. Women were also included in their tribal council. And after a somewhat drawn out and protracted war with Europeans um, during the 1600s and 1700s, they decided to head on back to Florida. Okay, because it just was not worth it for them. European war technology was far superior to what most of them had, and they were like, "Hey, why are we fighting these dudes with guns when we've got bows and spears and stuff like that?" They just used some common sense and headed on out back to where they had come from because, hey, safer pastures, right? We're not being shot at or dealt with harshly by any groups of people there. So they kind of returned back home. So the early relations, though, were actually pretty good. Um, so Native Americans and Europeans didn't have any real reason to be angry with one another. A lot of times we see in dramatizations and movies and stuff like that, it's always the cowboys and the Indians and blah, 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 blah. But the fact of the matter is, uh, Native Americans knew that they had a lot of natural resources here, and the Europeans were bringing over all sorts of really super cool technology. So they were like, haha, watch this, suckers. Here, you can have some deer skins and coyote furs and wolf furs and all that good stuff. And oh, I'll trade you that for that shiny new rifle over there because that's way better than a bow and arrow, right? You can kind of see that illustrated here in this painting. Um, so the English would trade things like trinkets, knives. Are you kidding me? Like a good steel bladed knife, over one made from a piece of flint rock or stone, firearms, uh, leather boots, that kind of stuff. In, you know, English or French clothing, alcohol became popular. Okay, because of course the Europeans brought over hard alcohol like rum, and other types of distilled spirits. And for a basic trade of a deer skin or a fur, for higher levels of technology or some sort of a comfort thing like clothing and rum, hey, those relations are pretty good. Now, eventually that would begin to deteriorate a little bit because what happened is so many Europeans began to show up, right? So not all the relations were good between the North Americans and the Native Americans and the English settlers, um, because they started to say, hey, there's a whole lot of these Europeans coming over here. And this was always our land, right? So this was our land. We've lived here for hundreds of years. And we don't know how we feel about all these European fellows coming over here and shooting our deer and they don't and see Europeans don't live off the land the way that Native Americans do. Native Americans are generally speaking hunter gatherers. Now they did do a good bit of farming, but it was like small scale, small scale local village type thing, kind of like your family garden. Um, and so they were just kind of growing whatever they needed for the season and hunting and gathering whatever else and then moving on, right? Whereas Europeans tended to industrialize things and try to clear out a big, huge field and cut down a bunch of trees and plant all sorts of stuff and then sell it and make money. And so that wasn't 100% compatible with the Native Americans, and it began to kind of encroach on their land. So you end up with a few different things that ended up happening, like the Coosaw stole grain from the English, and this started like a little spat between the two of them, and it gets unfriendly. And the Westo were unfriendly from the beginning because they just didn't too much care for these new funny looking fellows showing up on their turf. And so you can kind of see that this area down here is where most of the disagreements kind of took place. This is where the Yemassee were, okay, and these smaller tribal groups. But this is that Ace Basin region, and then the Westo were here. Now the Cherokee were mostly up here, okay, and then you have the Catawba up here. All right. So, and you can see the small, subdivisions of different types of tribes and all that good stuff too. But the Cherokee, Catawba, and Yemassee are the three main tribal groups I want you to know about. And for your classwork, we're going to have you answer a few questions. So next class, we'll talk about the war between the Native Americans and European settlers and things like that, and we'll move a little bit further forward into it. But for now, what I would like you to do is hop in there and answer your classwork. So let me see if I can show you guys. So right now we got a warm up posted. You should have already done it. And then your classwork. I would love for you to do this before you leave class, okay? And then right in between this is where you're going to see this lecture video. I just happen to be recording it right now, so it doesn't exist, okay? and it will be in this little green folder called 8/23/2021, and you will have to look at it. Let me see if I can't show you what I'm talking about. There we go. You'll have to look at it inside of this folder. So you can see this folder is for 2 straight weeks, right? This was the syllabus I posted. Here was the first work you did, and now I don't want it to get too confusing, so I'm going to give you a new little folder per day, right? So when you click on the little arrow for this one, you can see there's the warm-up, there's the classwork, and the video lecture will be posted right in the middle when you're watching this. I'm just recording it now, so obviously it's not available. But anyway, you guys, that's all I've got. If you have any questions, hit me up. Send me a message here on Schoology or to my email, chase.ferguson@sumterschools.net, and I will be available for you tomorrow during the day while I'm still sitting here on quarantine. So, with that being said, I hope you have a wonderful day. Obey Coach Jones. Don't give him a hard time, and make sure that you're quiet and doing your work. Take care and have a great day, guys.